Hi, everyone. You're listening to Bug Talk, a podcast created by members of the entomology department at Michigan State University. In today's podcast, we'll be talking to Dr. Andrea Glassmire and Dr. Eli Bloom. My name is Olivia Cope, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Sophia. You want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Yeah, so avid Bug Talk listeners will recognize Andrea as one of our co-hosts, and Eli has been on the podcast too. But just for new listeners, would you guys like to introduce yourself, maybe who you are, where you're from, and how you got to MSU in the first place?
Hi, I'm Andrea Glassmire. I'm originally from Pennsylvania. I went to school at I did my bachelor's at the University of Pittsburgh, and that's where I fell in love with ecology. I was given an opportunity to work on an ecological project with bugs and an invasive cattail and an invasive weed that was pushing out cattail in the wetlands. And it was a really cool experience for me. I just got to interact with these plants and these bugs, and I just really fell in love with the system and decided I wanted to go to grad school for that. And so I ended up at the University of Nevada, Reno, working with Lee Dyer. And there I got really interested in plant chemistry and how chemistry mediated interactions with herbivores and also natural enemies. And what was interesting, though, about that experience was I was living in Reno, which is a desert, but I actually did tropical ecology. So my entire dissertation occurred in Latin America. So I did projects in Costa Rica, Peru, Ecuador, and also Brazil. And that was just it was a really interesting experience because, one, I had never taken a Spanish class, so I had to learn Spanish, and I was solely working with local people who only spoke Spanish, but they were really they were the true naturalists. I mean, they knew everything about the forest and the bugs and the plants, and so I really learned everything I did out in that field system through them. This was a really cool experience interacting with these international colleagues. And so I did tropical ecology, but also had to learn chemistry. So I also was co-advised by an organic chemist. And so I spent a lot of time in the organic chemistry lab doing all of my own chemical extractions and then running all of my samples on instrumentation, such as chromatography and NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance. And that was just a lot of learning, but also a really cool collaboration that I got to have with these chemists. And then I was fortunate to get a postdoc here at Michigan State University where I could enhance my chemical ecology skills and apply them more to an agricultural system, which has been really fun for me because prior to that, I had worked a lot more on basic research projects. And so I applied to work with Dr. Will Wetzel here at MSU in the entomology department, and I started looking at how we could manipulate chemical traits in crop plants and in a spatial arrangement to see how that influenced the herbivores that came to the crops, but also the natural enemies. So we're looking at really using the plant chemical traits to change the herbivore dynamics and also to bring in more natural enemies for biocontrol. So that's kind of, I guess, where I'm at now. And it's been a really fun time, but I'm sad to say, but also excited to say that I just accepted a new postdoc at Louisiana State University, and I'm going to be working in Dr. Jim Cronin's lab in the biology department at LSU. And I'm going to be studying this whole different system. It's like very different from anything I've ever done before. I'm going to be looking at this Phragmites is this invasive, well, there's some native, but there's also these invasive species. It's like this grass that is essentially holding up the entire Louisiana coast, and it's starting to die off. And that's bad because if that structure, that vegetation dies off, then the coast kind of disappears. So we're looking at factors that are causing the die-off. And so my focus is really looking at how chemistry within Phragmites is mediating interactions between microbes in the soil, but also the herbivore pest. It's a scale insect that is known to really destroy this Phragmites. So Louisiana, I'm moving there in literally like a week to Baton Rouge. So it's going to be different.
Yeah, oh my goodness.
Yeah, congratulations, Andrea. I wanted to just say that before we move on to Eli.
Yeah, congrats. And I should say, I forgot to mention that the reason we have these two people on the podcast right now is that they're both moving on from MSU. So we wanted to get them in on Bug Talk before they depart.
Do you want me to say some stuff now?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. That's really tough to follow because like Andrea, you seem like you're like very accomplished and
Y'all,
like,
we're
really
all
interesting.
accomplished, Eli.
I
I just told you
know.
where I went to school. Essentially, I just told you where I went to school.
Yeah. But you've done so many great things too. So it's really cool. But I have some interesting overlap too. So I went to school at the University of Nebraska Lincoln from 2008 to 2013. And that's where I did my undergrad degrees in entomology and horticulture. I started in horticulture and then I fell in love with entomology, and I feel like I've been pretty much in entomology ever since. I grew up on a small organic farm outside of Omaha, Nebraska, and so that's sort of what my upbringing was like, and then that's also been one of the main things that I've studied as an academic. So after I graduated in 2013, I went to Washington State University from 2013 to 2019, and I studied pollinators on small organic farms in and around the Seattle area. And also during my PhD, I traveled abroad to James Cook University, which is in tropical Queensland, Australia. And so that's like how I relate to you, Andrea, because I got to spend some time abroad in like a tropical place, which is like pretty cool and very different. They're like stick insects. They're like this big, and it was very, different from growing up in the US and growing up in the Midwest. So after I finished my PhD from WSU, I started my postdoc here at Michigan State University with Sophia. And it's actually kind of interesting. People talk a lot about the value of networking in academia. And I ended up with Sophia because Rufus Isaacs came to WSU to give a talk. And I asked Rufus if Rufus had space in his lab for me. And he said, no, but I know someone who might. And so that's how I ended up working with Sophia and networked with Rufus. And I've been working with Sophia and a bunch of other collaborators in the Midwest studying pollinators and pesticide use in the Midwest and how pesticide use influences pollinators on farms, and pretty much any other project that I can kind of be helpful on. I've worked a bunch with a few different master's students of Sophia's, which has been a really great experience for me, getting that mentorship opportunity. And then I've also had the opportunity to work with Rufus and a bunch of other pollinator people on a piece going over US pollinator policy out of the Obama administration and how Rufus and this team of pollinator researchers have worked to address that here in Michigan. And so looking forward, I've been interviewing for jobs for about the last 6 months. And I have an offer right now, but I don't think I'll be able to tell you who's made me that offer, but we will see how things go. And so I'm hoping actually by the end of March, it'll be official and I'll know where I'm going next for my second postdoc, probably.
Oh, the mystery. I'm dying to know. I can't wait.
Yeah. You have to call me after this and I'll give you all the details.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah, we might have to do a
Or you can
sequel
text
podcast.
Totally. So I'm happy to talk a lot about the process, but like Andrea can tell you about like the after part, and I can talk more about like what it's like to like be on the search and that kind of stuff. But I don't think I can tell you yet like where I'm headed because I don't know. but it's been a fun journey. And Andrea can, I'm sure, talk a lot about the search as well. Andrea, like, I know you like had to spend a lot of time looking for jobs, and then there's like the two bodies, one job problem, because like both you and Josh are entomologists, and so like finding a job for both of you in the same place is also a problem that, you know, I'm working on too, because my partner is also an entomologist. So lots to talk about.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to start somewhere around that topic. Is that okay, Olivia, if I ask a question
Yeah.
and then I will shut up for a while?
We like
So
your questions, Sophia. They're good questions.
well, but
Yeah.
I tend to talk a lot, so I need to control myself. So both of you applied for your first postdocs before the pandemic, so you have a comparison between applying for a postdoc before and during the pandemic. And I wonder if you can compare, contrast your experiences in terms of like how easy was it to find positions? Did you see a change in that? How competitive positions are, how much of a consideration is where you're going to move next. Anything that you think is relevant would be, I think, of interest to a lot of people that are currently looking for jobs. Andrea, do you want to start?
Yeah. Okay. So as soon as you asked what the biggest difference, the first thing that came to my mind was how inexperienced I was for my first postdoc. Like I only applied to one postdoc. It was with Will, and I was very fortunate to get into his lab. He was really great, and you know, and I will say there was some networking, I assume, going on there. You know, he knew my advisor Lee, so I had a really good reference coming from Lee. So networking is, I think, huge in any sort of job, postdoc, faculty employment opportunity. If you have that, it's not the only thing, but I do think it's important. But I just remember I was like, just my mind was just like, I got to finish this dissertation. And so like, I wanted a job, but it was like, it didn't seem like at the time, and I feel really silly thinking this, but at the time I was kind of like, whatever, I just really need to get the doctorate. Like the job will come after that. But actually I think it is better to have a job lined up, and that helps you push you to finish. So I was really in a good situation. And so I, you know, was struggling to finish. And then, you know, I knew I was moving to Michigan, so I had this deadline. It got me out the door. And luckily I got to work with Will. This though, time around, it was not that easy. The pandemic, of course, didn't help. But I was also really focused on trying to get a faculty job. That's been really hard. I mean, for the past, since I've been working with Will, and Will was really good in this. Like when I first started, literally the first week I started, he was like, you need to find a job. And I was like, oh my God, I just started this job. And that was actually kind of like a blow to my confidence at the time. I mean, he didn't know this, but he was actually leading me down a really good path. I just was like so new to the scene, and like, you know, it was so overwhelming finishing your defense and then like moving to a new state and starting a whole new job, a whole new system with a whole new boss who's completely different from your previous boss. And here he is telling me I need to start like applying for a job. And so since I've been working with Will, I have been working on applying to faculty jobs. So I've been working on, you know, my research statement, my teaching statement, my diversity statement. You know, publishing is obviously very important, you know, giving talks at conferences and also doing guest lectures. You know, and I've been for like, you know, the past 3 years, I've been fine tuning all of those things. And, you know, they've gotten better. Every time you apply, you get better at it. I've had a few interviews. I would say I failed at those interviews, but I think if I looked at it positively, I learned a lot from the interview and that will make me better in future interviews. And Will has always said to me, like, you got to find the right fit. And like, I think sometimes in my mind, I'm always thinking like, I just want a job, but I am starting to see the value in that advice as well. Like, even when you're in the interview process, you can tell if you're going to be a good fit with that group or not. You know, maybe that's what they're seeing. So it's not necessarily that you failed at it. It's just like, you know, it's going to happen when it's a good fit for you. But anyway, so I've been struggling with that for the past 3 years, and then the pandemic hit, and this year was supposed to be like, I thought like I was going to be really competitive. Like, I've gone through this process a couple of years now. I'm starting to get more first authored publications, and then the pandemic hit and there's a hiring freeze, and that really hurt. And I I started to apply to like pretty much any faculty job, and they ended up being, I really want to do research, but I was kind of, open to whatever was available. And again, I got like an interview, but it didn't go very far. And so then I faced the reality that like, I guess I just need to look for another postdoc, because like I really needed a job and I wanted to stay in academia and I wanted to keep doing research. So then I started to look for postdocs. And I was looking for advertisements where I'd fit, and a lot of them I didn't fit. I mean, they're looking for, I feel like the hot topic right now is they're always looking for genomicists. I don't really do genomics. And then microbiology and like, especially soil microbiology. And I don't have any experience in that. I would love to gain more. But that was kind of hard because it's like, is there any spot for me? And that was really frustrating. And I remember talking to Eli about it, like feeling really down and kind of frustrated about it. And him and other people just kept telling me, keep looking, keep trying. So I also, one thing I did is I reached out to professors that are pretty well established to see if they had openings, or if anybody else that they knew had openings, or that they could like pass my information on. And so that's kind of an interesting experience. It's kind of like applying to grad school. You like feel like you're trying to date someone. That sounds like really weird, but like you like email someone, you're like, hey, this is me. Here's like what I can offer you. Are you interested in me? Could we be together? It's like really weird. And I don't mean to sound like crass when I say that, but it's an odd thing. And I will say it was really a positive experience. So I reached out to Mark Hunter at University of Michigan, and then he sent a really nice reference for me to a few other postdoc or to other PIs. And I followed up with them with some, I had a conversation with a few of them. I also reached out to my undergrad advisor, Walt Carson at the University of Pittsburgh, and he also passed my information along to some people. And I had interviews with them, but they at the time didn't have funding. They weren't necessarily accepting postdocs. So it was good to like network and talk with them, but it was also like, they didn't have money and the pandemic had hit. So it was like really hard. And then somehow I came across this ad to work in Jim Cronin's lab at Louisiana State University. And honestly, I think when I first started, I was like, oh, there's no way he's going to like pick me. I don't even know if I'm a good fit, because it was such a different system from what I've worked on. But I did have the skills that he was looking for. He really wants someone who's interested in plant chemistry. And so I can offer that. And I really like the fact with this job that I am going to get some exposure to soil microbes. And I'm really excited about kind of, branching out into a different direction and a different, part of research that I've never done. Anyway, so I reached out to him, and shockingly went really well. Like, I interviewed with him. He was so easy to talk to. We had a wonderful conversation. And then he essentially offered me the job pretty quickly after that, and I accepted. And so I'm just really excited to work with him, and I'm just really thankful for the opportunity, because honestly, I'd applied to like a dozen places and it felt like nothing. And it hits you every time. And I know everybody says you get rejection. Rejection's going to happen more often than not, but it can still get you at times. And persistence. So I think the key to it all was being persistent and just knowing that you got to look for something that you're a good fit at. And not everybody has money. You got to find where the money's at, and, and just have a support system. Like I said, Eli, I remember going on walks with Eli and talking about it. And, he always gave me hope, and, talking to Will, and he always said, like, just keep applying. And so, yeah, so that's where the journey was for me. What about you, Eli?
It's really interesting. I mean, I think you're a little farther ahead of me in terms of like, how long was your postdoc here? Was it 3 years or something like that?
Like 3.5.
Andrea?
It'll be about 3.5.
3.5.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you've been at it, I think like you've been in the postdoc game a little bit longer than I have. And so like I've always kind of looked up to you and thought like, okay, like Andrea is like the bar sort of, I guess you could say. And like, you know, there are other postdocs in our department that have been here a little longer, like Nate Hahn. And I'm like, okay, like Nate's the bar essentially. Like they're the people I need to look up to think about like what people who have been in the postdoc game for longer, like what I should be shooting for. And so I always felt like when, you know, you started applying for jobs and stuff, I was like, I don't know, I always felt like you were more qualified than I was. And so it's really interesting just being a postdoc and being in this community of other postdocs. And like, we're not really, like you and I don't study the same things. And so we're not really competing for the same jobs, but it's been really fun to like, especially over the last few months, like go on those walks with you and talk about how it's going and being like, oh, have you seen this job or did you see that job? And I had seen the job that you're gonna do now, and I was like, I didn't even think of you like as that kind of person, but like it's really interesting to hear you talk about fit because like there's so many intangible things, you know, when you are applying for these postdoc jobs that like it's not obvious from, you know, the advertisement what the person behind that advertisement is like, but also what they're actually asking for. Like sometimes advertisements are written based on what they think they can sell the dean or something like that, and you get into the interview and they're like, well, we kind of just like you the way you are, like you don't have to be this person that we asked for in this advertisement. We just needed to like frame it in a certain way to be able to get the money to advertise this position. But yeah, anyways, so let's see, before the pandemic started, I really hadn't started applying for jobs. So I had applied for a couple of jobs. I had a extension faculty job lined up for Washington State University in Spokane, and I had talked to the person running the search, and they had been so positive, and they were like, you're the person for this job, and like you don't even hardly need to interview or whatever. And they're like, you're gonna be a star, like everyone's gonna look up to you up there. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I gonna get a faculty job and like become this like extension faculty idol in Spokane, Washington? And it was like a pipe dream. And then I that was going on, then the pandemic hit, and then everything was frozen at Washington State University. All hires were frozen. And so I think that was pretty much the only job I had put in for, because a year ago I'd only been with Sophia for about a year, and I had really spent the first part of the 2 years that I've been here working on publishing. And when I got here, I really wanted to focus on publishing and building my publication record, because coming out of grad school, I only had a couple of publications when I came into Sophia's lab. And I was like, I want to come here and I want to do research and I want to publish a lot. And Sophia and I think like, and Sophia, maybe you can talk more about this. You had encouraged me to start applying for jobs. I had applied for a job in Wisconsin for a faculty job there, but I think it was more so just to get my application package together. And I think that was after the pandemic hit, but maybe you remember more better than I do. But during my first year, I applied for a postdoc fellowship through the USDA with Sophia. So that was like something that I did that was like not publishing and not working on research. That was potentially something that I would do. And we didn't end up getting that funding. And we found out, gosh, when was that? That must have been like spring of 2020 or something like that. And so, yeah, so I guess that's like one thing that Andrea didn't talk too much about either. Like, all right, so that's pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, I've had a very mixed search. And so I've applied for fellowships I've applied for another USDA fellowship. I've applied for a Marie Curie fellowship, which is a fellowship that's in the EU, and it's a pretty competitive fellowship. Like only about 4% of them like get funded, and I did not win that one. I have applied for a bunch of other small fellowships at different universities. One that comes to mind is the Lacretz Fellowship that I applied for at one of the University of California schools, and I didn't get that one. So ultimately, I've applied for fellowships, and I don't think any of them have really panned out. And then I've applied for postdoc jobs through advertisements and gotten a lot of interviews that way. And I've done a little bit of networking to try to find jobs, but none of that has really panned out in this search, kind of interestingly. And then I've also applied for a couple of faculty jobs. So there's the one in Wisconsin, and then there's another one that I don't think I can talk about either too much, but I am currently like in consideration for a faculty job at a land grant college. And so I can just tell you that like I've applied for like a lot of different things, and the search has been different and challenging. And I don't know, like I feel like a lot of people have said or thought like there would be fewer jobs during the pandemic, I guess, but during the time period that I've been applying for them, I haven't like had any shortage of things to apply for. And I have like a list of 20 or 30 jobs that I didn't apply for, and then there's like maybe like 15 to 20 that I did apply for. But anyways, yeah, it's really interesting to think about like my like more along the lines of like the first postdoc. I'm very similar to Andrea in that I didn't apply for a lot of postdocs. I just kind of networked, and then like pretty quickly ended up with Sophia. Like we did a few chats, and then the official job advertisement was written up, and like I was pretty much a shoe-in for that unless someone like amazing dropped out of the sky and was like the perfect person. And then like in the second one, it's been much more challenging, I would say. And I'm not sure if that's because of the pandemic or just because it's my second postdoc. And it's really interesting to think about like, what's your first postdoc and what are your goals there? And like, what's your second postdoc and what are your goals there? And if you have to do a third postdoc, like, what are your goals there? You know, and so like, it's very interesting, like what the purposes of those different postdocs are and whether or not they're just like a holding place for you to like be able to get a faculty job, kind of like what's going on with Andrea. It seems like you didn't really want to take another postdoc maybe, and you wanted a faculty job, but there wasn't quite the right one for you yet. And so anyways, I don't know what else to say about pre and post pandemic other than I think post pandemic, you like pre-pandemic, you would have been invited out for interviews, and now like during the pandemic, it's almost all done via Zoom as far as I can tell. And so that's like really interesting and different than, you know, what you would have potentially experienced before the pandemic hit.
Yeah, do either of you have comments specifically on what it's like interviewing over Zoom versus going in person and meeting people?
I've never gotten the on-site interview, so I've always done like a Zoom interview. Like so for a faculty job, you usually get a Zoom. There's a few interviews you do. So the first one's like a Zoom or a phone interview, and then if you pass that round, then you do the on-site. And then for postdocs, I never visited MSU beforehand. I just did it all through Zoom with Will. But I am wondering, like, if you did make it past that first round of interviews for a faculty job, are they even doing on-site, or is it all now just like online? So that's like an interesting point that Eli brought up. It didn't seem to change much of what I've been used to, but at the same time, like definitely Zoom is very important right now. And that's like how a lot of people have been connecting.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like before Zoom was like before the pandemic, Zoom was there, or like video chats and stuff like that was there. But I think there was always this assumption that you could meet this person in person, like face to face if you needed to, essentially, right? And that kind of changed the character of the interaction on Zoom. I feel like you it was just a means to Zoom was always just a means to an end to get to in person, to some extent, right?
Absolutely.
To be able to meet them. And now Zoom is how they're like, there is no chance of in person, before they make you the offer, before you, accept the offer, I think in a lot of cases. And so you have to make the full impression via Zoom. Like there's everything is riding on Zoom and how you present yourself in these interviews. And I can definitely tell you there's a different feeling between when you're connecting with someone through Zoom and when you're not connecting with someone through Zoom, and like when they're paying attention to you and they're not paying attention to you. It's very interesting to like get a feel for what that vibe is, I guess you could say, because I was never ever thinking about the vibe and how important it was before the pandemic via Zoom, because I was always just like, whatever, it's a video call. Like, if we need to like vibe, we'll figure that out in person or whatever. But now it's like you have to really think about what it feels like when you're in there and like whether or not you're connecting and whether or not people are like liking you, I guess. Like figuring out emotion and like response and like reading people is so important, and that's like a whole skill that I feel like I've had to learn during these interviews, and also like relearn how to do it through Zoom for sure.
Oh yeah, that's like a really good point you brought up, because I know in some of the interviews I had, like, man, it was hard, and like, and you're responding to the questions and stuff, but in your mind you're like, you can see the people, and there could be like 4 people there, right? Or and I think that's a harder interview when you have 4 people you're trying to connect with versus just a one-on-one. But you can tell, like, you're like, I'm like giving my responses, but I'm watching the people and I'm like, that person is not interested in all what I'm saying, and like, but I'm like still smiling and trying to like respond, and it's really defeating in that moment, because then you like try harder and it's like frustrating. Oh man, that's such a good point you brought up.
Yeah, because in an in-person interview, no one's going to be checking their email while you're talking to them.
Yeah, or like interacting with their kids. And I know this has been a hard time, but like I remember when one of the faculty interviews I had, that the search chair was like late to the meeting, and then during the interview, like he just like wanted to get through the questions because it was already late and he had another one lined up, and then like his kids were like coming in and out, and that wasn't his fault with his family. It's just kind of like what the situation has become, but it was really challenging. That's such a good point, Eli. It is hard to make that connection, and I like to think that I can connect with people. I'm pretty outgoing, but Zoom, not like a non-face-to-face, makes that hard.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, there have definitely been interviews that I've thought I've bombed via Zoom, and then I've gotten like invited back for a second interview, essentially. And then there's been ones that I've thought I've done really well on and really connected with them, and then had them say like I didn't get the job too. So like there's a lot of it is in this like, how do you feel about it, but also like the balance between the feeling that you get from people and like what they're looking for is really interesting. Like you can connect with somebody, but it's just one part of the equation that's going on in their head too. So and you talked a little bit about like emotional stake, in these kinds of things. As you interview for all these different jobs, you kind of like get your hopes up, and it like, and then when you don't get them, it feels bad or whatever. And I'm totally there with you, like especially when an interview goes really well and you start dreaming about like that place, and like what it could be like to be there.
The scientific community you're going to work with. Yeah.
Totally. And the people you're going to work with, and like all of the opportunities and things. And then to have them say like, oh, you are really, really good, and we really like you. I get like a lot of people have said, oh, I really liked you and I really liked your ideas. but like we went with someone else. But if you wanted to write like a grant with me, or if you wanted to apply for some funding with me, like we could maybe make it happen. But I think for like the situation that I'm in right now is like I need a job too. Like there's also an economic reason for me to like be applying, and like I think especially during the pandemic, I am incredibly risk averse right now, you know, like I need a job, and just like everybody needs a job right now. And so like it's great to get positive feedback from people and that they say that they like you, but then ultimately when they don't offer you the job, it's like it hurts. And then makes it harder to apply for other jobs too. Like so it's really it's a very tough cycle, like especially at this level. I think like I'm much less naive than I was when I had finished my PhD, right? And so I think like the stakes feel higher or something like that.
But even like with your critique, like you don't know what you did wrong, even when they say that. Like that's what's also frustrating about when you don't get it. You have no idea what you bombed at, or like what was it you, or was it like the fit they were looking for? I guess I like to tell myself it's the fit, but
Yeah.
it's there's a lot of like at the end of it, I don't even know. I'm just like, well, I
Yeah.
wasn't, like, if you weren't prepared for a certain question, but like you don't know, was that the total reason, or was it like, something else? It's really hard. It's hard on both. It's hard on the interviewees end, because you just don't know. And I know like Sophia's done a lot of job searches, and like, how do you reach out to every applicant and tell them every little detail? Like that's not necessarily part of your job. But I guess, could you follow up, and would they, so Sophia, can you follow up with an interview, and would the person actually respond with like a genuine constructive response as to why they didn't pick you?
I'm not sure that everybody's going to be open to that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's worthwhile. Like if you're a sucker for punishment, especially.
I know, punishment. That's it.
But sometimes I will say that if you do get a good crop of applicants, and they are, let's say, not equally qualified, but each of them are bringing something unique that you would like to have, right? And you can't put it all together into one person, so you're gonna have to choose one out of many. How you like play that chess game in your brain, I think is hard to explain to somebody in a cohesive way. So even if I was asked how I got to that conclusion, I may have a hard time pinning down the exact reason why I picked a particular person. And a lot of the times, if that's the case, if there's like applicants that are so close in qualification, or like there's like a hair between them, it's the personal little things that may tip it. And that's the implicit bias, I think, that we're all talking about these days, that I may not be aware of, but it is at the end of the day what tips the scale for me towards one person or the other. So I feel like that's where those implicit bias tests are important, so that you can get a control of yourself of, am I going to hire a male or a female, or things like that you should be aware of. But again, like those are so, like, who could you explain that to in a manner that you're not going to end up in front of a court of law, because you've chosen like X person, because you have this like implicit bias that you're trying to correct for. I don't know, like these are really complicated issues, I think, that we're all grappling with. And then the other thing that I was going to add to that is, I think I've been in this position that I have now for over a decade, and I've really grown to trust my gut over the years. Initially, I didn't want to trust my gut because I thought I was inexperienced, and I was going to make the bad decision if I did that. But then over the years, I learned that that's actually a really, really reliable way for me to hire people, is like trusting my gut feeling whether this is going to go well or if this is going to go horrible. And that's another thing, like, Andrea, I don't know how you would explain to anybody like what your gut is telling you. I don't know how to verbalize those things, you know? It's just tiny little things that happen over the course of a conversation or a meeting, that add up little by little to that positive vibe that you're getting.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like, one of the things that I've thought about is the difference between applying for a job and a fellowship. And a fellowship, they're making a judgment on you based on things that you've written almost entirely, right? So whether or not you get a fellowship is based entirely upon a piece of paper where you've tried to sell yourself. But in an interview, they actually get to meet you. So they're also making a judgment on you based on who you are, and all of these other types of intangible types of interactions that are difficult to explain. So it's very interesting, like, if you are to get a job and not a fellowship, or vice versa, like, maybe it's because, like, you got a job because, like, people just like you, but you can't just say, like, in your fellowship application, oh, and people like me, like, that's tough. You can't just say that. So it's very interesting to think about, like, how people perceive you and how that influences whether or not you get a job.
Yeah, and I will add that when, like, you're on a job search committee, you have to hand in a report to HR at the end of that, and you have to detail the qualifications of the person that you're hiring versus the person that you decided not to hire. So there's a process to this in which you have to go through all these steps. So, and I think that that's something that one could share, like Andrea was asking earlier, or at least those are like tangible things that you're putting down there. It's not like my gut was telling me this, that, or the other. It's like you're detailing the qualifications of the person that made you go with one person versus another. So those are things that go back to HR, and HR looks at it, and then you can make an offer or not. And I think that might be something that people can share with you. But I don't know if it's the whole truth, that's another matter, I think.
And I loved, you were so right on when you're like, or if you're a glutton for punishment.
Yeah, I don't know
No,
at the end of the day how much you're gonna learn, it's the fit, right? You're the right person for particular positions and particular combinations of people, and you can't be another person. Like, you can't like all of a sudden change to fit another environment. So I don't think you're the wrong person. I don't think you should think of it that way. Just,
Yeah.
Well, we're running a little low on time, so I wanted to switch gears here just for the last few minutes. I really appreciate you guys sharing your experience. I think it's gonna be helpful to people. But to get a little more lighthearted, I wonder if you could share with us just a favorite memory of Michigan State, either work-related or not work-related, that you will particularly cherish as you move on.
So I have kind of a few that will be brief. One really positive thing about Michigan State, and I think this was a really good experience for me being my first postdoc, was that there was a large group of postdocs in the entomology department that I could really bond with. Like, we used to, on Fridays before the pandemic hit, we used to regularly go to a bar and just, like, chat, whether it was about work or not, but you had that camaraderie with other postdocs that were going through the same thing. And like Eli said, maybe he looked up to me, but like I looked up to the senior postdocs in the field. Like, they knew what was going on, they'd been through it. And so I think postdoc's hard. And I was told before I moved that, like, transitioning into a postdoc can be really hard. It can be really lonely and isolating because, like, you don't have like the support in a sense that you did as a grad student. Like, you're really coddled as a grad student. Like, your advisor cares about you and kind of like you're their child. And I know that sounds kind of weird. like, because they feel, I think, a little more responsible about like developing you. But when you're a postdoc, you're like there to work. Like, you know, the assumption I learned was like, you need to get papers out, you need to get this done. I'm not trying to teach you much. I mean, we are working together and learning things from each other, but like, you know, you're supposed to be an independent researcher, right? And so having that group of postdocs was so important to me. And so that was I really enjoyed those Fridays. And like those Fridays, like I could have felt really defeated that week. And then like somehow, you know, someone would make a joke, like Phil from the Isaac's lab, you know, with his Irish jokes and witty sense of humor would, you know, make you feel all right. Like, it's okay, you're gonna get through this. Like, who cares? He'd just be like, who cares? Whatever, have a beer. Like, you know, he kind of needed that. And so like, I know Eli said he looked up to me a lot, and I just hope that I was able to pass on some of what I had gained from the other postdocs like Kelsey and Tom from Sophia's lab and Phil. Like those people really got me through some of the most challenging times as a beginning postdoc. And it wasn't anybody's fault. It's part of the game, I think. Because that's a hard transition, and maybe it's not hard for you as a postdoc, but it's very different. Sorry about the phone. And then the last thing, I really enjoyed my lab community. Maybe I'll pause and let Eli go, but I'd like to say one more thing.
Okay, yeah, I'll jump in. So I totally agree with Andrea that the entomology department here is incredibly supportive. And so I was really happy to come in and have people pretty much say like open to meet with you and talk to you. And I think Andrea is right. Like when you come in as a postdoc, especially for your first postdoc, you're still kind of thinking like a grad student. And so like people need to help you start to make that transition. And I think, you know, the entomology department here was a good place for that. People were really supportive, you know, and some people said, you know, I would want to meet with them and talk about ideas and things like that. And I met with like Doug Landis, for example, and Doug talked to me, and we didn't end up working together on that project that, you know, I met with Doug early on, but we ended up writing, you know, ultimately working together on this US pollinator policy bit. And so you know, I really wanted to collaborate as part of what I've done here and network and you know, like, I mean, the entomology department at MSU was always like a goal for me for some reason. Like I've always looked up to this department and thought like, that's a place that I want to be. And so I came here and like, it's been really good to me, you know, like I think the first year was really hard, like figuring out what a postdoc is. And I think that would have been hard anywhere, you know, like your first year as a new postdoc, I think it's just tough. And then year two, it's just like, wow, like I can do anything, really? Like I can do anything, and, you know, pretty much, you know, like Sophia's been very supportive. And like once I was able to get my kind of main research project done, like we've done so many other really cool things together. And so like just to be in an environment where I could explore my creativity was amazing. And then I've held this belief for a long time, but like entomology to me is about the people. Like for some reason, I'm just like attracted to entomologists. And so like, I'm not your standard entomologist has like a favorite insect or something like that. I just like working with entomologists. And so like being here at MSU has reinforced that. And I'm just like, I just feel like entomology, like entomologists are my people, and I continue to really like to work in entomology. And then I guess like other big awesome things that happened here, like Michigan is, you know, like there are some really cool things in Michigan, and my partner Liz and I were able to go to Pictured Rocks this last summer. And one of the cool things about being a postdoc is that like if you get your work done, then you can like go and explore and have a lot of freedoms. And so Sophia's been really great, and like I've taken lots of time off when I needed to. And one of those times off is we went to Pictured Rocks, and it was like everything that it was supposed to be and more. And so talking to all those listeners out there, if you ever come to Michigan, go to Pictured Rocks. It's amazing. Some parts have a lot of tourists, but other parts are just like, will totally blow your mind. So.
I totally think that people are really important too. Sophia was a huge mentor to me. I've never had such a strong female mentor, and I wasn't her student, and she would meet with me. And what I like most about Sophia is like, she was never trying to manipulate me, or maybe manipulate's not the right word, but like, she would just tell me how it was. Like, she wouldn't like try to like, and it wasn't like a mean thing. It was just like, okay, let me like be honest with you. Cause I felt like sometimes I didn't have I wanted more honesty in some cases. And she was just a really great person in that regard, and like very smart about science and thought, she had done chemistry before, and does chemistry. And so she was like such a great connection for me. And then the Landis lab, oh my gosh, like, I don't know how many times I went over and bothered Nate about like some stats question, and, talked to Liz about some method. And, Doug knows, like, is so knowledgeable about like the predator system and natural in ag. So that was like, everyone was just so welcoming. And Rufus, I remember having beers with Rufus. Like, I went and we went sled riding with Rufus and his daughter. And like, everyone in entomology is just so welcoming, even the professors. And so that was really helpful. And then finally, I have to say, like, my the grad students in the Wetzel lab, I consider them like brothers and sisters. Like, I got really close with Kaylee, Dan, and Eliseth and Luke. And man, I really like being part of a team, and that meant so much to me that I was part of a team. And we cared about each other, and so that was really great. I just, the people here at MSU are really great, and I'm going to miss that the most, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So before we go, if people want to keep up with you, do you have any website or social media you want to plug?
Well, Bug Talk, I try to give a plug to Bug Talk. I gave some talks at LSU, and I plugged Bug Talk there. Bug Talk is a really great way to learn more about everyone in the entomology department. So we're talking about how great these people are. That's a good spot to hear more about the great science, but also the personalities that exist in the department. I have a website. I think if you just Google Andrea Glassmire, it'll pop up. Or if you email me, it's a signature on at least my Gmail.
You could, Andrea, you could be
Twitter. I don't Twitter, but I need to.
Andrea, you could be our remote correspondent from Louisiana.
Oh my gosh, yes. I'll be like,
yes.
Yeah, there's a great entomology department down there too. So I'm excited to get to meet them. I would love to do some with the folks down there. Man,
yes, please. Yes, please.
But stay tuned. I do hope to get a Twitter handle. Eli taught me the importance of a Twitter handle, especially during job interviews. He found a lot of jobs that I missed because I didn't do that. Yeah, so I'll stop. I talked a lot.
Oh, you're good. You can find me on Twitter. If you want to find me on Twitter, it's sustainability, but it's spelled with some numbers and like a B in the middle. So it's like sustainability. And it's a play on the type of research I do. It's kind of nerdy. And I don't have a website, but you can catch me on Google Scholar if you want to look at my pubs. And right now I'm on Sophia's website if you want to read a little bit more about my background. And where else can you find me on the internet? I don't know. I've also plugged Bug Talk recently though too. So yay, Bug Talk. And yeah, like
thank you for doing that, Eli.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I was like, I want to start a podcast like Bug Talk, and they were like, cool. We like extension. And I was like, all right, let's do a podcast. So it's exciting.
Podcast where it's at. All right, I think that's gonna do it for today. To all the listeners out there, we'll be back next week with another exciting episode of Bug Talk. It's the coolest podcast around. All right.
For
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks to the listeners, and thank you, Sophia and Olivia. It's great being on.
It was awesome.
See you, everybody.
Okay, bye.